Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's virtual plant clinic. I'm Bill Lester. I'm with University of Florida Extension here in Hernando County, and joining me today is my regular co-host, Lily Browning. Good morning,
Hello.
Lily.
Good morning.
And Lily is our Hernando County Florida-friendly landscape coordinator. Is that the correct term?
Sure.
Okay, she's the coordinator here in Hernando
Program
County.
coordinator.
Okay. Coordinator, manager, supervisor, whatever exact terminology. And joining us today is Frank Galdo, who does pretty much the same thing. He is the Florida-friendly landscape person in Pasco County. So good morning, Frank. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. We have a few people on here, so let me go ahead and throw in right now. If anybody has any questions, just go ahead and type them in the chat or the comment box right below the video. You could do that on Facebook. You could do that on YouTube. Just say good morning. If you have any kind of questions, problems, just go ahead and join right in, and we'll go ahead and get to everybody's questions. But I guess, let's see. Frank, what's going on down there in Pasco County? What exactly do you do down in Pasco County?
A little bit of everything.
Right.
In terms of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, some of my focus areas are irrigation efficiency, especially in new construction, helping to support it on the builder developer side and make sure it's implemented well. So a lot of smart irrigation work, trying to make sure that some of the soil moisture sensors are going in correctly and doing what they're supposed to do. I've been doing a lot of virtual programming since we hit these interesting times, and
We all have that.
Yeah, it's been a fun adventure. But yeah, a bit of work with plant selection, plant questions that come in, and also just outreach with whatever issues come our way. HOA issues, questions about ponds, trees, you name it. I also do a lot of the social media that's going out from the Pasco County FFL account. So social media and blogs, if you're seeing them, good chance I had something to do with it.
Yeah, I know that we have an awful lot of overlap. People who watch our programming also watch yours and vice versa.
We do, yeah.
Because we are right next door to each other.
Yeah, very similar conditions, in a lot of cases, very similar plants going on, and very similar kind of issues that pop up. So, yeah.
Except you've got that little section that's 9B that everyone in Hernando is jealous of, and everyone in Hernando has a friend or a sister who lives in that section, and they tell me, but they can do this plant and that plant, and why does it freeze for me? So.
Yeah, see, I actually see a lot more similarity between Hernando and Pasco than some of what's south of us. Once you hit Pinellas and Hillsborough, you really get south of the frosts a lot of years, and they're starting to push zone 10 in a lot of those areas at this point with warming up and all. So.
Oh yeah, you take a ride down to Tampa or St. Petersburg, it's a whole different kind of world down there as far as plants go.
Definitely.
Yeah. Do you see the question from Edward, Bill?
Yes, I do. We got our first question of the day. So what is the advantage of Flora mulch? So Frank, what is Flora mulch?
So Flora mulch, from my understanding, is made from ground up Melaleuca trees, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So it's essentially removing invasive species from South Florida, grinding them up and turning them into a mulch that is a sustainable product. It's something that Melaleuca grows very quickly, and the more of it we can grind up and turn into a mulch product, the better. I don't recall. Is there also considered some beneficial properties specific to Melaleuca in terms of termite repellents or anything like that, or no?
Because of it's a tea tree, Melaleuca is tea tree. So the tea tree oil might have a tiny bit more termite resistance than, some of your other, but that's nothing that you can rely on or can be proven. But, they used to say that cypress mulch had that, and maybe 50 years ago when there was still some old hardwood cypress left, it might have had some termite repelling properties. But now we don't recommend the cypress because of the exact opposite reason, that we do recommend the Melaleuca. The cypress, they're just chopping down the young trees to grind up and sell to us as mulch. And that is unsustainable. Melaleuca, it's called the punk tree in South Florida. It's a problem tree. What you don't want to do is, I've had people from South Florida tell me that they went like to an event where they were just grinding them up and just selling them and, fresh ground up. So then those people kind of brought more Melaleuca trees home with them. So you want to make sure it's, a professional product that's been heat treated and all the weed seeds are gone. But so you are helping the environment that way. And because of it being the Melaleuca oil, the tea tree oil, it may have some termite repelling properties. Other than that, it's as good of a mulch as pine or, hard mulch. It ages kind of silvery, so it's kind of pretty. So
I know you can also find eucalyptus in the stores.
Right.
That's an invasive tree down in South Florida, and it's very sustainable. So, it's going to keep growing, and they grind it up. You cannot rely on it to deter termites, but eucalyptus does have, the oil in it that is probably at least somewhat distasteful to ants and termites and things like that. And they all break down. They all add to the soil. They all add to the organic matter. So they're all, healthy for your garden in the long term.
Definitely. I think one other thing that comes to mind when you're talking about some of those mulches, the Flora mulch, the eucalyptus, is that unlike something like pine bark or pine straw, if your desire is to match the color of some mulch that you've already got going on, most of the the Flora mulch and things like that are available in multiple colors. So you can get them in the black and the red and things like that that might be compatible with what you already have in your landscape. Whereas, pine straw is pretty much pine straw color. If you like it,
I wasn't aware that they were dyeing the Melaleuca mulch. That's an interesting thing to know.
I'm pretty certain. And, sometimes we do get questions about the dye process in the mulches and whether those are toxic and harmful. From my understanding, and maybe you guys could chip in on this a little bit, my understanding is that the red is largely an iron oxide based dye, like a rust based dye, essentially, naturally derived, not toxic and not like a really funky synthetic chemical. And the black is similar. It's some sort of I don't remember if it was iron sulfide or some sort of naturally derived product.
Yeah,
so
mixed with
a lot of folks are concerned about adding something unnatural or weird and chemical to their landscape.
The research I've tried to do, from UF doesn't say not that you can't use. It just says make sure that you know what the dye, is, that it is from a natural product. Some of them are like soy-based dyes. So that's what I tell people. As far as I know, no one's come out and saying that's bad. But, and if you want that color, you want those weird unnatural colors in your yard, then, that is, personal taste. As far as we know, there's nothing environmentally harmful about it.
It can look attractive.
Yeah. Black can really make other things stand out. So, yeah.
Yeah, black against a white sidewalk or a white wall of a house. I'm a little different. I personally like landscape rock very much. And I know that you can find a wide variety of different types of landscape rocks, different colors, different shapes. I know you're not supposed to use it on...
He's telling two FFL people that, you see?
You should use it in a small spot for an accent. You shouldn't do, large, vast flower beds all in landscape rock. This isn't Arizona. Maybe people there... Their entire yards are landscape rock, but that's a totally different environment. I've always liked it. I know that it can look attractive. It can be really difficult to manage, though, because when you start getting those weeds coming up through it, And even if you use the weed barrier cloth, it seems to work well for a while, but not long term.
The other thing that happens in Florida is because of our soil, you put down rock, and next year it's like, where's the rocks?
Yeah,
you're not going to find them again.
To get that soil mixing with
down
it,
there.
The weeds grow in.
Yeah, that's the complaint I've heard, that people put down rocks and then they're like, they don't stay. They seep into the soil. So does mulch, but at least it's adding, good things to the soil. I'm a big rock lover. Wherever I go, within legal limits, collect rocks. And so I use them as borders or as like accents. But as far as filling up a whole bed, YFFL doesn't recommend it. It's not adding anything good back to the soil, and it's just attracting heat, and that can be stressful to the plants.
Yeah, a lighter colored rock is gonna attract less heat, and from a home pest prevention perspective, having a ring of landscape rock around your yard is somewhat decent protection against insect pests. But the wood chip mulch does break down and actually add to the soil, so it's adding a definite benefit.
Right mulch, right place.
There you go.
Exactly. So Teresa from the office has a question that Minerva asks. She's been growing watermelon and the blossoms won't open. And, Teresa has a whole string of questions here today. So I guess Teresa's going to keep us busy and not let us off the hook.
She's been saving them up.
So if you're growing watermelon and the blossoms won't open, first of all, right now, you could plant watermelon and it grows fairly quickly. If you planted the watermelon during the heat of summer, it probably had a lot of problems with insects, diseases. Watermelons are normally planted in the early spring and then grown and harvested. You can try planting them again in the fall around now or maybe a month or so ago, and maybe that's when Minerva planted them, and it's just getting the very first flowers on it. What happens a lot with watermelon, and this is the same with cucumber and summer squash, is the first flowers you get are going to be male flowers. So you can tell the difference between the male flower is just a little flower that's yellow and it opens up. The female flower looks the exact same, but at the very base is a teeny tiny little fruit. So the female watermelon flowers are going to have a little tiny baby watermelon at the base of it. And then obviously when that flower gets properly pollinated, the flower is going to fall off and you're going to have a little watermelon that's going to grow larger and larger and you eventually pick. So the very, very first flowers on any watermelon or cucumber or squash are either going to be male or they're going to be difficult. So maybe they don't open quite correctly. If you're patient, it is going to, right now is a very nice, very good time of year to be growing it. It's still warm, but not scorching hot. We still have a lot of insect pests out there right now. It's still, I know it was pretty warm and humid at my house first thing this morning, which really favors diseases. So you're going to have problems with all them still right now. But if you're patient, you should get more flowers on them that are going to open, and hopefully plenty of female flowers with a little teeny tiny watermelon at the very base of the flower. And then you're going to get some fruit off of that.
Yeah. If I could pitch in one more thought on that.
Sure, go right ahead.
From my experience with growing various, cucurbits, squashes, cucumbers, melons, all that, the flowers tend to be open in the morning, and then through the heat of the day, they wind up closing up. And if Minerva is checking in the afternoon, for instance, if she gets done work, comes home and checks the watermelon, and isn't taking that time to check them first thing in the morning before she heads off to work, it may be that she's literally missing that period when they're actually open. By the end of the day, they're going to be closed up, and then you're going to see maybe the buds that are going to open tomorrow morning, and you're going to see shriveled flowers or closed flowers, but you may not at 5 o'clock in the afternoon see any open flowers ever on this plant, even if they're open all day and getting pollinated in the morning.
No, that's a good point, because I know if for anybody who may want to hand pollinate their flowers, you have to go out there pretty much at dawn. That's right. That's when the flowers open up, they're wide open, and you're able to transfer pollen from the little male flowers to the little female flowers so that you're assured of getting good pollination. Or for anybody who may be trying to grow them inside of a greenhouse and you don't have bees coming and going into the greenhouse, you're going to have to hand pollinate them. And that you have to do at dawn. So Tom asked, he's been coming out to the garden and finding his plants cut at the base. What is doing this?
His neighbor.
Hopefully not Tom's neighbor, although I guess theoretically that is a possibility. There's different things that could do that, all depending on what plant it is. Is it a new little seedling that's coming up? Is it a vegetable? Is it an ornamental? I know that one thing I can think of is we have caterpillars that are called cutworms. And if you're growing a vegetable garden and your plants are either small or maybe they're a little bit larger, these caterpillars come along mostly at night, and they don't feed on the leaves very often. They love to chew through the stem, and they'll do it right at ground level a lot of times. So if you come out in the morning and your little tomato plant is now plop laying on the ground, if you look at it and it looks like it's been chewed through the stem, there's a good chance it's a cutworm. And they hide during the day. They hide in the mulch, and they're black or very dark colored, so they kind of blend very well with the soil. They can be really hard to catch actually in the act, and they're out there dirty feeds at night when you're not out in the garden or you're not able to catch them. So it could be cutworms. Any other ideas what it could be?
I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind that I would want to rule out. I actually had some that were chopping down my seedlings about a year ago, and I literally went out at night with a headlamp and was able to confirm, I saw one marching right towards the plants, and I was able to pick a couple out of the garden. But yeah, that would be my first assumption. And then, other than that, some of the other caterpillars, the armyworms, can sometimes do that. If it's tomatoes, you might have a hornworm that's doing some chopping, but usually they go from top down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you'd see that tomato hornworm. They're the size of a car. So
yeah, eventually.
And then technically, when you throw in mice, rats, voles, little animals like that are out there primarily at night, they could do a lot of damage. So there's
definitely. In terms of cutworm prevention, have you ever done any of the attempting to work with the cups around the base or foil around the base or anything like that, or do you go more for the BT approach, or how would you recommend Tom work with preventing the cutworms from doing in his fall vegetables?
I usually just would use either BT or spinosad for caterpillars, or when I suspect it's a caterpillar, because a lot of caterpillars, you can go out in the middle of the day and you see the chewed up leaves, you turn over the leaves, you're gonna actually find the caterpillar. I've never tried using the cups, although I am aware of that. And I've never had a big enough problem with cutworms to justify putting cups around the stems.
Yeah. I do know, in terms of them camouflaging really well, one interesting thing that I read a while back that I haven't tested out yet is that UV light will make caterpillars like that actually glow at night. And so, even when you're looking at them with a flashlight, they do camouflage really well. But apparently a UV light for things like hornworms will basically make them fluoresce and much easier to see. So if you really want to get detective style with it,
that would be fun to take the kids out.
I've never heard about that. I'm going to have to go out and get a UV light and go out there and try it.
Bioluminescent garden.
Right?
So for anybody who wants to get in contact with our office, let me start showing this now. There is our phone number, 352-754-4433. If you call that number, you will almost definitely get in touch with Teresa, and Teresa could tell you how to send us pictures. We get pictures and phone calls. We get them through email. We get them through the phone calls. We get them through Facebook. We get questions from all over. So Teresa can give you ideas on how to, the easiest way to send us all your questions, your pictures. A lot of times for plant ID, pictures work very, very well. We ask that you try to send multiple pictures, up close pictures and far away pictures, clear pictures. Clear pictures are a lot easier to work with than really blurry ones. And if we need more pictures, we'll tell you, and you can go out there and send us even more pictures. But we can almost always identify a plant from pictures. And if I can't do that, I could send that to the University of Florida, and they do a fantastic job of it up there.
You better have clear pictures to send up there.
Yes, if you don't send them clear pictures, they will they will get on us, and then we will ask you to send very clear pictures. So
now, to add to that real quick, a tip for anybody who's looking to take pictures. A lot of us these days are taking our pictures on these, and they've got a good autofocus.
So do I.
But that autofocus will sometimes have a very difficult time focusing on something very, very tiny and slender, like a flower stalk or a small insect. The tip that I would give is if you hold down on the focus on your camera, focusing at something like your hand or a sheet of paper or a book or a large leaf, you can often get it to lock focus at that length and then slide over to whatever small skinny thing you're trying to get the picture of. You're able to lock your focus at the right angle and the right depth and everything, and then still maintain that focus on the really tiny thing. That works really well.
I actually found how to autofocus and change the ISO on my phone when I was sitting on the ground, luckily with a very patient Gulf fritillary caterpillar who was just munching away at the passion vine, so wasn't going anywhere. But I was able to get some nice pictures of him, but I found I could change the ISO on my phone camera. It's like, wow.
Very nice.
Yeah. I knew what it was. I just wanted a picture of him.
Okay. So going back to the watermelon here, Minerva planted them in April. And planting watermelon, that's not too bad. You may want to try in the future putting them in a little bit earlier. You can plant those warm season watermelons, cucumbers, all the different cucurbits, the zucchini squash, the yellow squash, here as early as late February. But that's kind of pushing it because we do sometimes get late frosts and freezes. So late February might technically be a little bit too early. But you want to try to get them in just as early as you can in the spring, because that way you're going to avoid a lot of the different disease problems and insect pest problems. So for anybody who has moved here from up north and maybe up in Pennsylvania, up in the Pittsburgh area, you're planting your tomatoes and peppers, you're putting all that stuff out in, when would you do that, May? I know it was May in Maryland. So maybe late May.
End of May, like Memorial Day, probably, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's way too late for here. That's way too late. Your tomatoes should be producing during May, and by the beginning to maybe middle of June at the latest, they're done. And you need to forget about trying to grow those things during the second half of June and July and the first part of August, because it's just too hot, too rainy, too humid. You're going to have way too many problems with those plants. So here, follow University of Florida planting recommendations, all depending on exactly where you live, because I know that we have people from a variety of counties that watch us here. So follow UF vegetable planting recommendations and get them in just as early as you can, and that way you're going to avoid a lot of problems.
Definitely. I encourage folks to follow those UF recommendations, and potentially I could see sometime in the near future those even being pushed a little bit earlier into the year, because it's easy enough with very small seedlings to cover them up and protect them from a frost coming through. I actually have thrown pine straw or just some coastal hay or something straight over the top of them and just covered them up when they're small. And I'll push that boundary even further back, because a lot of times our weather in January and February at this point, other than those 2 days where a frost comes through, is plenty warm. And the farther you can beat those pests back, the more opportunity your plants got. So, yeah.
Yeah, and hay would work very well. You can go to a feed store, get a bale of hay. It's not very expensive. If you need it, you can cover the plants overnight, and that helps to keep them warm. And then afterwards, you can compost it.
Yeah.
And we have a question here about that, about if you're growing hot pepper plants, do I lay a patch of 1 inch of mulch over the soil? So for hot pepper plants, really for any vegetables, you definitely want to try to mulch while you're growing them. That helps to keep the weeds down, hold in the moisture. But for vegetable plants, you don't want to use wood chip mulch like we were talking about earlier, because pine bark or even shredded cypress or Melaleuca, it's large chunks of bark, and that's going to be really, really tough on the stems of hot peppers, tomatoes, whatever you might be growing. If you make compost, putting, a half an inch to an inch of, rough compost on the surface of the soil works very well. And then over time, it completely breaks down and goes into the soil. So if you keep mulching your vegetable garden and keep making compost and adding it, you'll find that over just a couple years, you're going to have so much better soil than what you started with. And that's really a key to having a good vegetable garden.
If you have a source of pine fines, some of the local landscape supply places around here actually sell pine fines. That would be the one exception, I would say, to the pine bark caution that you said. Pine fines are usually so fine, they break down real quickly, and they do enrich the soil, and aren't necessarily, bonking up against the stems and stuff. A lot of the blueberry growers grow almost exclusively into pine fines and stuff like that.
Yeah, fines are, they get them from the bottom of the pile, and they've turned pretty much.
Yeah, in some cases, they're almost already composting. The one caution I would say is they're not as effective at preventing weeds as some of the other types of mulches. So
probably grow some beautiful weeds on it.
It's a good medium.
So we have a question about planting wildflower seeds. And Wes said he bought some seeds from the Flora Wildflower Foundation, and it says to plant them in the fall. When in the fall is a good time to plant the seeds? Now.
Yeah, I would say now.
It's, what is this, October 8th? It's fall.
Yeah,
now.
I wouldn't wait any longer unless, you're planting them inside, because you wait another month or so, possible to get frost or freeze in early December, or I'd plant them now.
Yeah, my approach typically is to, if there's any seasonal cues from the actual plants in your surroundings of, when are they naturally dropping their seeds,
right?
Kind of mimic that. If not, we're getting past that edge of things where we're in the peak of hurricane season and most likely to get a storm coming through and dropping 14 inches of rain. So, obviously early fall, you've kind of got that risk that anything you plant is going to get, washed down the road or something. But I'd say as we get farther into it, you want to be able to take advantage of those cold fronts that are going to start coming through and dropping, those nice even rains and things like that. Yeah. That would be my approach.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, going back to the watermelon once again, Minerva is getting up bright and early in the morning. That's always good. My dogs make sure that I don't sleep too late. And she's now self-pollinating, which helps.
Okay.
And it's not difficult to do. With any kind of squash or watermelon, it really is pretty easy to do, to hand pollinate, to ensure good pollination, because that's very important.
Okay. Excellent. Now, was there a question that was a little ways back? It was something about pine straw. I don't know if we jumped past one. I didn't want to have somebody think they were being ignored.
Oh no.
Briefly popped onto the screen, I thought.
Wes says he uses pine needles from his yard, and he has a good supply from his yard.
Oh, okay, it was just a comment.
Okay, yeah.
Pine needles is a great mulch. I've always liked them very much.
I've been venturing more into the very back of my yard, because what I have is a half acre, and the back quarter acre is I leave kind of natural. So I mowed a path through it over the weekend. So, and I'm making myself take walks back there so that I keep the path squished down, but so that I can see more of the pollinators and all that stuff. And I've been noticing some of the pine straw I have back there is almost like really squishy to walk on. I'm like, I have a good supply here. I'm going to start. I can even use it for my path or for some other areas around the yard too. So
here, I'll let you guys talk about this one because I know exactly what I think Melinda is referring to. The beautiful trees all over my neighborhood in Spring Hill that have the kind of pink or salmon or flowers. And they're so pretty.
They are so pretty.
Guys, are they royal poincianas?
Melinda, do you have little red and black bugs in the spring all over your yard?
It's funny. After our Florida Fall Color Program, I was noticing some of these blooming around the county, and I thought to myself, we should have definitely included a little mention about these and a few others that give a lot of Florida fall color, but we don't encourage.
You're right.
Because I think that's what this tree is that's being referred to here.
So you want to tell her, Bill? You want to deliver the bad news?
Oh no, I'll let you guys, because this is an example of wrong tree in the wrong place.
So
a golden rain tree. And they're gorgeous. We're not going to tell you they're not gorgeous, especially the salmon colored, bracts and things that they have, and then the yellow. But they are an invasive exotic tree. You probably notice you have billions of baby trees under it. And also around the spring, you may have these little red and black bugs, millions of them all over the place. They're called bugs. And they're there specifically to eat the seeds of your golden rain tree, so they're kind of doing you a favor, but a lot of people are turned off by their visit. So the only way to effectively not have those bugs is to not have the tree, but also birds and wind and all these things take, like any invasive exotic, like the golden rain tree, far away from your house into an undeveloped area where then they crowd out our native plants and cause ecological problems. So, probably if you have one, it's a very large tree, it might be very difficult to get rid of, but you would not be able to buy one. They are on the federally listed, don't buy, sell, or transport. Maybe not federally, maybe the state list. So, nor don't go and get a little starter tree from your neighbor either. It's just not a good idea. So invasive exotic plants are wrong plant, wrong place. I tell everyone there's no such thing as a bad plant. We kind of get in our mind, oh, that's a bad plant. It's not a bad plant, and it didn't decide to hop on a ship and come over here. The most invasive exotic species of all caused all these problems, and that would be us. But so that's your answer.
Yeah, my neighbors had one, and after it flowers, if you look at those little color flowers after they fall off of the tree, each one is made up of like two little petals, and if you kind of open it up, inside of each one, there's two seeds. So my neighbor across the street had a tree, and I have little seedlings that pop up all over my yard in the flower beds. I get Jadera bugs in my yard every spring, not many, but people who call in the spring, they say, I have these little black and red bugs, and there's millions of them all over my house. What do I do? It's like, get rid of that golden rain tree. That's why you have them. If you get rid of the tree and clean up all the seeds and the twigs and everything else, within a year or so, you will not have those bugs again. So if you want a golden rain tree, you have to live with the Jadera bugs.
Yeah, I had at our old house, the entire fence line was golden rain trees.
Oh.
And
Probably really pretty.
It was, I mean, it was pretty for a little while in the fall, but it was a nightmare. I was pulling golden rain tree seedlings out of everything, and those little bugs, they crawl up the walls, they crawl under the doors. You know, it's a tree that it looks nice in somebody else's yard. Admire from a distance. Do not try to seek one out or find one on Facebook Marketplace or something like that. You know, we moved from the golden rain tree land to now I live in camphor land. I pull out probably hundreds of camphor seedlings. It's another one of those trees that the form of a mature, large trunked camphor is beautiful. Admire from somebody else's yard. They are horribly invasive and pop up in all sorts of natural areas and cause nightmares for anybody nearby.
Yeah, I had at our last house because the neighbors had camphors. We didn't have one in our yard, but they pop up in the flower beds on a regular basis, and you have to dig them out and pull them out.
Yeah, right now they are loaded with berries, and it's just millions of berries hanging up there waiting to turn into new trees.
Yeah, and both of those trees, along with many other invasive exotics, because that's part of their nature, is to grow and spread quickly. And what do we always teach about trees that grow fast?
Weak wood.
Weak wood.
Yep, I can vouch for that.
Tree could be weak in a storm. Probably not something you want around.
I can vouch for that. Those ones along the fence line when Irma came through, you know, Irma was not a very major storm, but Irma certainly had me doing a lot of cleanup of golden rain tree limbs out of my yard. It was a mess.
Yeah.
Okay, going back to those wildflower seeds, Wes has some that are supposed to be planted in the spring.
Well, that's a harder question. Trying to figure out when spring is a little bit harder than fall, but I would go with like what, well, it's hard to say because if they're supposed to, you know, if you pay attention to nature and what nature is doing, like Frank said, it depends on when would you say? I would take a guess as when spring was about mid-February to try and get them planted by then, or?
I'd say late February, March 1st. That's spring.
To plant in the spring, yeah. So I assume they're supposed to be summer flowers.
So what sort of flowers? I wonder if Wes is actively engaged in the conversation right now, if you could chime in with what sort of flowers. The thing that comes to mind with that springtime is it can be very hot and very dry. The last couple of years, we've had incredibly hot, dry kinds of, you know, spring, late winter. You know, it varies year to year. But for some of those sort of things that I'm trying to start off at that point in the year, I will actually favor starting them in little starter cells so that I can have a little better control over the moisture and do a little more babying them. Because if we've got one of those heat wave kind of years, sometimes it can be a challenge to keep them going, especially depending on your soil conditions. But, you know, that's going to vary some on the plant, whether it likes a little bit of root disturbance or whether it's really sensitive. Some of these, you know, they want to start sending their taproot down and they don't want to be messed with once it goes. So, yeah, it's probably going to depend a little on species, but if you want to control where it goes and have a little better success, it might even be good to start in pots.
It's Mimosa, Sunshine Mimosa, pink powder puff.
Sunshine Mimosa. Okay.
I've just planted some now, but it was vegetatively planted some.
Yeah, I've never done it from seed. I believe that's one of those where you want to scarify it a little bit, but I don't know beyond that.
I would look at the wildflowers.org, you know, because they have a lot of information on their website where you ordered it from to see if they have, you know, charts of Central Florida, you know, when to plant each seed as well. The UF probably has that somewhere, don't you think?
Not sure. UF is a little bit limited on Sunshine Mimosa info. That's the last time I checked. Sunshine Mimosa and some of the other native ground covers that are getting a little more commonly used, like the
I never even thought about that having seeds. I just,
yeah. After those little truffle of flowers that they have pop up that look like something out of Dr. Seuss, they'll sometimes get little seed pods. They're very inconspicuous compared to the flowers, so it's easy to overlook them.
Okay, here we have a question, and I have some pictures to show of this in just a moment. Janet brought in some plants and some pictures of her Flora umbrella tree. It's turning brown and falling off. Also, the tops are curling under. She's recently put some black cow down, has some white rock for mulch. I was also told in my email, let me see if I can go ahead and screen share here, and you guys are going to have to tell me if this is working correctly. Digging the old email here, the email bag. So can you see that picture okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. She has one of the multicolored Floras.
Okay.
And I see a couple leaves curling a little bit. I was told that she also used spectricide fungicide several times. So we have the Flora. We have another plant. I'm not positive what it is.
Is that, maybe that's a Nandina?
That could be. And I'd have to look at a leaf under a microscope to see if that is a fungus on there, although it really doesn't particularly look like one. It could be a reaction to the fungicide. Any fungicide that you use, you want to read the label very, very carefully. Many different products have restrictions on don't use when it's above this temperature or below this temperature, or in the heat of the day when it's very sunny, because it could damage the leaves, or you might get essentially chemical burn from it. So that may be possibly that. We have another plant, and I wasn't really sure what this was. The little bit of yellowing could be nutrient deficiency, could be a watering issue. The leaves, if they're puckering, I'd look on the undersides of the leaves with a hand lens or microscope to see if there's any kind of insect issues. Things like aphids and a lot of other insects, when they feed on a leaf, they'll make it curl and pucker a little bit. And here we have an azalea. And I believe here we have another picture of an azalea. This one looks fine. The little bit of brown spotting on there is probably a fungus, but you have to keep in mind that if you have a plant and it has a fungal leaf spot on it and you spray a fungicide on it, what it does is it protects the new growth and the new little leaves from getting the fungus. It doesn't fix the older leaves and make the spots go away. So the older leaves are probably going to turn yellow and brown and die and fall off. But a fungicide really is only used as a protectant to help protect that new growth from catching the fungus. So in this picture, it looks like most of the new growth looks pretty good. And it's really just a couple of the older leaves that are turning yellow and have spotting on them and are probably going to fall off. So let me give you a real quick warning with azaleas. If that little azalea is planted in a spot in your yard where it gets a lot of sun, long term, it will not do well. A lot of people don't realize that azaleas need to be planted in partial shade. Really, the only places I see where they do really well is if you have large oak trees in your yard and you get that speckled sunlight coming through the oak trees. Azaleas do great in that location, that environment.
And if you live further inland, like Brooksville or Dade City, as compared to Spring Hill or Newport Richey too. Now there are places there where they do well, but it just likes that oak hammock area better than the more sandy soils.
Exactly. And I see, and I'm sure Frank sees a lot of this also in new home construction. They'll put azaleas either in a front flower bed or use it as a foundation planting around the house. And even if you put it on the north side of a house, that's almost too dark. You don't get that nice speckled sun. If you put it on the east or the south side of a house, azaleas are going to burn up within a year or so. They're not going to grow and thrive and do well long term. So everybody loves azaleas, but you have to have the right kind of yard for azaleas to do well in.
And if you do, you can ignore them. They'll just do their own thing.
Exactly, because Lily, I know that you go through, downtown Brooksville, some of the more historic neighborhoods, huge oak trees. They have huge, beautiful azaleas.
Dade City does too.
Spring, I'd really love to have azaleas like that in my yard. If you don't already have the oak trees or the tree canopy, you're not going to get the azaleas because they go together. You have to have one to have the other work well.
Yeah. Well, and like you were mentioning, along the north side of the house, you kind of got this boom bust thing with the shade, because you do have deep shade part of the year. You're also going to have that point in the summer where the sun is to the north, and you're going to have the sun baking on a brick wall and that poor azalea in the middle. And it's getting the summer sun, it's getting, just thrown around on this roller coaster. And on top of that, you've got it right next to the foundation where typically the pH is off the charts because of all the concrete and everything else, the fill dirt that was added and things. So
they do like pH, yes.
Yeah, definitely, plant it along the back edge of the property if you've still got some conservation area that's got some more natural soil and some more natural shade from the tree line and things like that. Otherwise, plant your trees, get your canopy going, add your azaleas and things like that a little bit later.
That's a very good point. We mentioned how well they do in the more inland, the oak hammock areas, but also there's generally older houses over there in Brooksville, Dade City, those type of areas. So there is more natural soil going on. The azaleas don't like fill dirt, from a house that's less than 10 or 15 years old either, because it's nothing. There's really nothing there.
It's sterile. It's compacted. It's high pH. Just not conducive for a happy azalea. Now, some of those other plants that were having issues, I know there was the recent addition of the black cow.
I was thinking that too. There might be too much nitrogen there.
Potentially, this is only anecdotally, but I have recently been reading reports of some issues with some products like that, where there was some type of herbicide used in fields where some of that stuff was harvested from. This is only anecdotally, so it's certainly not, UF anything, but I would certainly, maybe pull some of that away from the plants, give the soil a little bit of a flush. And I'd also wonder, those beds that are rock mulch and everything, has there been any recent addition of herbicides that might not have come from the products, but might be something you're spraying or your landscaper spraying? Because herbicide damage can take a lot of different forms with your trees and your shrubs and things like that. Sometimes it can result in chlorosis of the new growth of the leaves, where you get some very pale leaves. I've even seen bleached out white leaves from herbicide damage on some sensitive plants. You can get curled and puckered and strange witch's broom kind of growth, where you get a proliferation of very small buds and unusual growth patterns. So if there's been any kind of herbicide use, things that would kill off the weeds, if there's been any weed and feed use in the lawn surrounding there or anything like that that might have had a little bit of overspray, those are certainly things to try to rule out too.
Yeah, and you just have to have the slightest breeze for herbicides to blow off target. And it only takes a little bit to damage leaves. That's why you really have to look at that leaf under a microscope, because herbicide damage, from a picture can look very similar to a fungus. And you have to actually look at the microscope to get a better idea, is it a fungus or is it potentially herbicide drift?
And that one plant was a Nandina, so yay, I win the ID prize.
Very good. But speaking of herbicides, poor Jacqueline has tons of coral artesia. We have a lot of that in Hernando County. Unfortunately, came with the property. I've been told an herbicide is the only good way to get rid of this invasive exotic. What should I buy?
So my first thought when it comes to coral artesia is, I'm going to say that it really depends on what you mean when you say you have tons. Because coral artesia is one where even fairly large plants, if you've got the willingness and the the fitness to be getting out there and doing a little bit of hand pulling, it's not the world's most difficult plant to pull. It's got a bit of a taproot, but you can generally get one that's even pretty well loaded with berries and yank it out. The benefit to doing that is going to be that whatever berries are attached to it, you can get rid of. Whereas if you herbicide it all, most likely whatever seeds are on there are going to drop and they're going to remain viable. The herbicide doesn't necessarily translocate to the seeds, and birds are still going to spread them and things like that. So if it's a relatively manageable thing to get hand pulling on, pay some neighborhood kids, get them out there, get them excited, go for it. I know you guys have an excellent invasive species removal program up there in Hernando. I'm kind of jealous of, so you probably got plenty of experience with exactly this.
Yeah, because you have to keep in mind all those little berries, if they fall off onto the ground, they're all potentially more coral artesia plants.
So when you do pull them up, throw them away, put them in a truck with a tarp over it and take it to the landfill. Don't just pile them up somewhere, because you're not accomplishing anything.
Yeah, you don't want to compost them.
No, don't compost them. Unless you want a forest. You see our friend with us, Bill? We have Sid Taylor watching us today.
Oh, okay.
Florida Forestry.
I have a whole string of comments I'm not all the way down to yet.
Welcome, Sid. We're glad to see you.
But yeah, coral artesia is not really difficult to kill. So any kind of wide spectrum herbicide, a glyphosate product, triclopyr, any one of them is going to kill it. The problem is, if you just spray mature plants that have berries on them, the plant's going to die. The berries are going to fall off, and now you have that many more that are going to keep popping up. So with any kind of invasives, it's going to take diligence. You're going to have to keep checking, and as more little plants germinate and come up, go ahead and take care of them. Now, if you remove all the larger plants and a month or two from now, you have a big flush of those seeds germinating and they're all coming up and they're all maybe 2 inches high, that would be a fine opportunity to spray them with herbicide and kind of be done with all of them. But you're going to have to keep checking, because I know all the different things we deal with here. Brazilian pepper drops tons of berries also. They are viable for a year or two. White lead tree, the little seed pods that fall off of them and break open, those seeds are viable for, I think it's 10 years. So it's not just one and done. You're going to have to keep after them, do a good cleanup the first time, and then just keep checking back. And if you're determined enough, you can win.
Yeah, we have a company who had a really brilliant idea, because we do have a program that you have to get rid of your Brazilian pepper and your white lead tree. Even if it's in your yard, you have to get rid of it. So one of the companies is selling people, almost like termite companies, yes, we'll get rid of these, but we're going to come back, a contract to come back every year to get rid of the babies that are inevitably going to pop up. So yes, it's a continuing cycle and continuing fight, probably for several years.
Yeah, similar to like a termite contract. They come out on a regular basis and check for you.
Mm-hmm.
So Lily Phyllis says in her part of Pennsylvania, the last frost date is May 15th.
Right.
Oh my gosh, that's the middle of summer here.
I know. That's why I said I don't know about Memorial Day or something to make sure you're okay with your tomatoes. Yes.
And if anybody wants hay, Wendy buys about $100 in hay every week. So.
Yeah, you sounds like you can also get some other type of material from her. And once the hay is processed for your compost as well.
Well, it sounds like she has pine shavings also. And that, I mean, that's fine. That breaks down, it decomposes. Pine shavings you could use as mulch. Composting it is going to be fine. I know people who compost their own animal manure, whether it be horses or chickens. It's mixed with pine shavings, and it adds the carbon component to the high nitrogen manure component. So between the two, it does make a good mixture to compost. So pine shavings are fine also.
Just don't use the manure too soon. You know, we're worried about pathogens, and well, especially in your vegetable garden. You don't want to use the manure till you know it is totally composted and no longer smells like what it is. And
yes, for anybody that wants to compost animal manure, check with our office. We have a lot of good information. You need to do it properly and carefully.
Farm animal manure.
Exactly.
Herbivore manure, not any carnivore manure.
And dog poop and the contents of cat boxes and kitty litter needs to go into the trash and up to the landfill. You don't want to be messing with composting that. There's a lot of very good reasons why we're not going to get into, but you don't want to be composting those. But speaking of compost, how do you prevent those green cockroaches in my compost black bin? If you actually do have green cockroaches, that's a Cuban cockroach. And you know, I'm sure I have them in my neighborhood, in my yard. I haven't noticed any this year. You'll normally see them flying around the porch lights at night during the summer. I know here in Spring Hill, my neighborhood, I've seen quite a few in the past. But that's an invasive cockroach that obviously originally came here from Cuba. And it looks like a cockroach. They're small, they fly at night, and they're green. They're kind of a lime green.
I haven't seen those.
You'll see them here. They're fairly common. That doesn't hurt your compost. So if you have a compost bin outdoors, you will get a lot of different living things in it. So you will get flies, you may get fly larvae, you may get the occasional cockroach in it. It's really not damaging or hurting anything. If you have your
excessive amount, I would check the ingredients that you have in there, and you want to put more of your browns, maybe hold up on the greens. And also, as we always talk about, what causes a stinky compost, the various things, I'm guilty of, I've got a little coffee container in the kitchen that I put the compostable material in. And if I let it, ferment in there before I take it out, it might be a bit of a problem. In fact, I just had this the other day. Every time I came in the house, you come in the house, you're like, what is that? So, took the trash out, loaded the dishwasher, washed everything, and I'm still like, what is it? And my mind never told me it's the compost. So
yes, it has to go out on a regular basis. And I'm told
right, get it out there on a regular basis. Add more of the leaves or the branches, and maybe it's too full of food or something like that. But yeah, the bugs in general are doing what they're supposed to do. They're helping the breaking down process.
Yeah, generally, if you back off a little bit on the fresh kitchen scraps, it's going to be a little bit less attractive to insects. Although no matter what you're composting, you're always going to get some kind of insects in there. It may just be ants. It may be something else. So don't think that you have to sanitize your composting operation. you can handle having some insects in there without it damaging anything or being unsafe.
Yeah, and I can handle any insects whatsoever except roaches. Roaches are my one thing in life that I don't know why they exist or why they have to exist. And so if I open it and I see a roach scramble away, I'm going to be unpleasantly affected, but I know it's part of the process. So.
My compost is loaded with the one that's probably the most common question. I've got tons of the black soldier fly larvae, which, if you're not expecting those, they are one of the major decomposers in compost here in Florida, and they're just wiggly and squirmy and look like giant maggots, and they're funky to see the first time if you're not expecting them, but they are amazingly efficient composters.
They've looked at them at using them on a commercial basis, and I think in other countries they use them in actual compost operations. They raise them deliberately to compost things.
Yeah, they're fantastic. They've naturally recruited to my compost pile, and man, they go through it.
Let's just go on to something a little bit different. A papaya plant from Walmart, and not transplanted it in his backyard about 3 weeks ago. It did fine up till now. Now the leaves are turning yellow and droopy. That could just be transplant shock. So you want to, anytime you transplant something, transplant it be as gentle with the root ball when taking it out of the pot and transplanting it as you can. Be very careful to plant it at the correct depth, not too deep, because that's bad for any kind of plant, whether it's a rose bush or a petunia or an oak tree and everything in between. You can plant it a little high. It's going to settle in over time and be just fine. And you're going to have to water it. So until those roots start to regrow and spread into the soil, if it doesn't rain, you're going to have to water it really well every day and keep an eye on that.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, in the past 3 weeks is when the rain has gotten less than it had. We had been getting a lot of rain for the last 2 weeks or so. And if she got it at Walmart, it was being watered every day, several times a day.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I remind people, you get it from a nursery, you got to remember it was being watered every day. So, I'm in water conservation. I certainly don't recommend overwatering, but you have to remember what you brought home, what they're used to. So you have to acclimatize them and kind of wean them off of, slowly getting that everyday water, especially when they're establishing they need water anyway. So
another thing I would say,
barrel, and then you won't be wasting water when you're watering them.
Another thing I would say, whenever you're dealing with a newly planted plant, some of our soils are a bit hydrophobic, which means that they repel water. So if you've got the type of silty sand where it's a very fine grain, kind of compacted, where you tend to see the water rolling off downhill, you will want, in general, it's a good idea to do this, but especially with that kind of soil, make a little bit of a soil berm with the soil that you pull out of that planting hole. Make a little bit of kind of a moat around where you've got a little wall that's going to retain that water and help it to sink in right on top of that root ball. Because if that water is going all around everywhere but that root ball, you could wind up having the roots of the plant itself sitting very dry in that well-draining potting mix that it was in its pot in, and everything else surrounding could be wet, and you get all sorts of chaos going on.
And
make sure the water's going where it needs.
New plantings. Usually when you get a new planting, you also have a bag of new mulch. So that new mulch is pretty dry too. So I would say when you first plant, wait a couple of weeks before you put mulch on it, because that mulch might end up just sucking up all the water that's not getting to the plant. So wait a couple weeks, let the mulch, kind of then weather in, but don't put it on the root ball part of where you planted. Still leave that open to get all the water and the rain in. So I would, and I like your idea.
I'm sorry. So Les has a whole bunch of questions today. He has cherry laurel trees popping up in his viburnum hedge. And I know from personal experience, if you have cherry laurels, They pop up everywhere. They are, I would always refer to them as a weed tree.
I was going to say, but we can't talk bad about the cherry laurel. We're not allowed to talk bad about a native. It's pioneering.
They're native. They're native, right? They're native to Central Florida.
Yeah, that's what I said. So they're pioneering.
So they're not
weedy, and they are weak too. So they're a great tree for the woods. Maybe
they
not.
Are aggressive. So they're not invasive, but they are aggressive. So they will, because they make the little berries, and the birds eat the little berries. If you have one tree in your yard, the birds are going to spread those berries all over, and they'll pop up like crazy here, there, everywhere. Usually where you don't really want more of them. They're fine trees to have. They're very pretty in the spring when they flower. Mm-hmm. It's a great early spring nectar source for bees. It's usually one of the first things that flowers in the spring. And I used to have a big patch of them in the front yard. I go out there, you can stand underneath them, and if you're quiet, you can hear the buzzing, because it would just be filled with every kind of honeybee, native bee, wasp, fly, everything else in the entire neighborhood was up there going for the flowers.
Right.
Yeah, I would kind of go right along with what you guys said. It's a native plant with a lot of wildlife value. It does grow very easily. It doesn't take a whole lot of work. It's got nice green, deep green leaves and everything. But when it's showing up where you don't want it, it definitely is a problem plant, because it grows very fast. It grows very easily. It doesn't need a whole lot of anything from you to get very big very quickly. So try to spot them early on. Try to recognize the leaves. The sooner you get them out, the better. If they're growing mixed in amongst your hedge particularly, that's a problem, because once they get established and once they get a pretty decent root system tangled in there with that viburnum, they become much more difficult to get out of there. So the problem is really that the birds are sitting there and hanging out in your viburnum, and they are planting seeds. It's going to be an ongoing thing as long as there's cherry laurel anywhere in the area. And we're in Central Florida, there's cherry laurel in the area. So unless you get rid of the birds or you get rid of the hedge, you're probably going to continue to have them pop up.
And
that's why you just have to keep digging up.
Yeah, the size of your landscape and everything, there's lots of great plants out there, but not everything's the right fit for, your particular landscape, especially if it's a small one. You may not, it might have wonderful wildlife value, and so it'd be great in the woods over there, but not necessarily be great in your yard.
I will say, on the creative solution side of things, my sister recently moved into a house in Holiday where there was a little mixed hedge in the front yard, and it was mostly Indian hawthorn that really wasn't doing so great. And then I was looking at it and I'm like, what is this other plant that's mixed in and forming the rest of the hedge and actually being pruned as a very nice hedge? It was cherry laurel. It was cherry laurel that was basically being pruned right alongside the Indian hawthorn, and at this point has outgrown it. And it's kind of making lemonade out of lemons. Now, I saw a terrible version of that one time where somebody had done that with Brazilian pepper that had popped up in their hedgerow, and the Brazilian pepper had basically outgrown the viburnum and was now being pruned as the hedge at this shopping center. And I was just like,
Okay, I guess we need to wrap it up shortly here, but we got like 2 more questions that I see. So here's one of them from Dee Dee about, is there a better time to plant fruit trees? So when do you think is the best time of year to plant fruit trees?
Well,
everybody's thinking.
From what I understand, and I know there's a little bit of variation depending on how big the tree is, how well established it already is, and whatnot. But I believe that for a lot of them, kind of the fall winter time where they're a little bit more dormant, there's a little bit less top growth going on. It's a little better time for them to get their roots acclimated. But it's going to depend a little bit on a number of things, including how much you can water and how large of a tree it is and things like that.
Depends on what kind of fruit tree you're talking about also. For ones that do go dormant, like peaches, plums, nectarines, fall would be a good time because they are going to naturally lose their leaves over the winter, and it gives it a chance to get settled in, spread its roots, kind of get acclimated, get to feeling at home in your yard. Maybe if you're trying to be adventurous and experimenting with some kind of tropical fruit, I know people are planting avocados and mangoes and things like that, trees that really aren't deciduous. If you put them in now, you'll have to keep them warm if we get a bad freeze. So you may want to wait until spring for that.
Keep them in the pot so you can bring them inside. Yeah, we have a freeze.
Sure, you can purchase one now if you have the opportunity to. And if there's any way that you can get a dwarf variety of any one of those, I don't know if they have dwarf varieties of avocados, but I know mangoes, they have dwarf varieties. If there's any way that you can grow it in a really large container that you can still move into your garage or up closer to the house during the winter, that's a real bonus. That's a way to keep it warm and keep it from freezing. It's kind of difficult to cover a decent sized mango tree out in the middle of your backyard. That's going to be a tough one. So the tropical ones, you probably want to wait till spring. Citrus, you can put in pretty much any time of year. Fall now is easier on it. It's less hot. Days are shorter. It's going to be able to focus more energy on getting settled in and spreading its roots. So now would be probably a fine time for most fruit trees. Like I said, it does kind of depend on exactly which one you're thinking about putting in.
I will say, if there were a worst time for trying to plant a fruit tree, it would probably, for most of them, be sort of the late March, April, May kind of time, where we're really at the peak of our hot, dry season. But it's also sort of the peak of the beginning of the growing season for a lot of these, where they're really trying to flush out a lot of growth. They're trying to flower. It's asking way too much of the plant to try to sustain all that top growth and go through the acclimation phase with the bottom growth and the roots and everything for most species, and at least as far as anything that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, if we're having a dry spring, that's a tough time to put anything in the landscape because you're going to be out there water. Because when we go through a dry period, keep in mind it's very sunny and warm all day, very little cloud cover. So that just kind of adds to the amount of water your plant is going through and losing. I know many things.
That springtime breeze coming through and just really desiccating things.
Yeah.
Well, and the days are getting longer again, so that's telling the plant, as you said, have all that top growth, start getting ready to fruit. And that's a lot of energy, wherein its energy should be concentrating on its roots and getting established where it is. Yeah,
I know more tropical things. A lot of times summer is not a bad time to put it in, especially if we're in the regular rainy season. You're getting rain on a regular basis. You're getting some cloud cover, and things like most palm trees, tropical fruits, if you put them in summer and early in the rainy season, they can do very well. It's a little tough if it gets really, really hot. But remember, a lot of times, as soon as it gets really hot, that's when the thunderstorms come in also, cool things off, which helps a little bit. And all that extra rain is going to be a real bonus for this tropical.
Definitely.
One caution, really depends on what you're putting in.
Speaking of which, where's all the rain we're supposed to have this week? Where is that?
It's pretty sunny outside of my house right now. It did rain the other night. I was kind of surprised.
It did, but then
for a little bit.
My app told me it was going to rain all week, and it's been beautiful and sunny.
Maybe later.
Well, I was going to say one caution. You mentioned the benefits of planting certain things during the rainy season. The thing that I wind up seeing sometimes happen with that is we do in some years hit that thing where right around September or October, the rain shuts off.
Yep.
And what I find is that's an abrupt halt to the watering and complete saturation this plant has been used to. And sometimes that's taking the training wheels off too quick. So I always remind people, be ready to give the water and kind of help wean it down when that rainy season shuts down, because sometimes the stress actually comes months after you put it in the ground, but before the root system is really, extended out into the soil where it needs to be long term.
Hey, where's all my rain? What happened?
Right. You take the training wheels off and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what happened?
And a lot of times, the larger the tree you're dealing with, the longer it takes to establish, because I know people that will, work with a landscape service to bring like a decent sized oak tree in and put in their yard. It could take 1, 2, maybe even 3 years to fully establish. So the smaller the plant, the quicker it's going to establish. The bigger the tree, you're going to have to provide water for it if we don't get it naturally from rainfall for at least a year. So some people think like, oh, well, I watered it really, really well for 2 weeks, and why is it dead now? It's like, well, you quit too early. You were going to have to provide water for it for a year or more, depending on how large the trunk is, until it's able to get by on its own. And after a certain point, you really, for many trees, after a certain point, you don't have to worry too much about additional irrigation.
And then
I know I have mature palm trees outside. The last thing I'm going to do is water them. They do fine. And oak trees, and people, how much should I water the oak tree? Never.
Right.
Pine trees, don't water them. Pine trees are very unhappy getting watered and fertilized. They want to be left alone. So after it's established, many things can get by just great on their own. Until it's established, you're in charge. You're going to have to provide a lot.
The recurring theme I keep hearing in the last month from various sources is basically buy the smaller plants because you're going to be better off than with that instant gratification that you're looking for. But the smaller plants, not only are they more economical, you can buy more of them, you're going to have an easier time establishing them. You
really do.
And Bill and I heard it in the context of a class we listened to, was that Friday, about snowbird gardening. I was listening to it so I can appropriate it because I'm going to offer a similar class. But that was also one of, for part-time residents, while you're here, buy the young plants because you have a much better chance of it getting established before you leave. So it just seems like that's just one of the things I keep hearing. So young plants are the way to go.
It's counterintuitive, but it's definitely true. And, just a final point on that, it's also less opportunity for it to have gotten pot bound, root bound in the pot, and then potted up into a larger pot, root bound again. Often when you get a larger plant, the roots are less than ideal. They've been growing in pots too long. They've probably, in a lot of cases, not really had the care they needed before being moved up to the next size pot. And yeah, you will get something that's got a lot more root issues that will affect it long term, in my experience.
Okay, we got a last question here from new Carly Lane. And she has a question: thoughts on using sawdust for acid-loving plants?
You're not going to change the pH for any length of time here in Florida. Everything leaches so quickly through it. So whereas if you don't use a whole lot of sawdust, it won't hurt. You can put it like in your compost. We have suggested that. But if you're attempting to lower your pH, you're not going to be long-term successful. That's my opinion on that.
Sawdust generally doesn't impact or change pH dramatically. And keep in mind, sawdust, when you're making compost, when we're looking at things decomposing and breaking down, the bacteria that are doing it need a source of carbon and they need a source of nitrogen. Sawdust is like 100% carbon. So sawdust will break down and compost. I've told people before, if you build a compost bin in your backyard and fill it up with sawdust, you can make beautiful compost. It may take 5 years for that to happen because it's going to break down very slowly, but it will definitely break down over time. So too much sawdust as either a mulch or a soil additive or anything else with all these different things, moderation is key. So you can use a little bit of sawdust, but you want to keep, moderate it, not go overboard. You can use, I know people when they're making a compost pile, you can use some clean wood ash from if you have a bonfire or something in your backyard, but not too much. You need to keep it in moderation. So sawdust, a small amount would not hurt as mulch, maybe not be ideal, but you want to keep it in moderation. You wouldn't want to put a 4-inch layer of sawdust as compost under your plant. It's probably going to mat down and repel the water and start to cause other problems.
There was a yard that I certified as Florida friendly. Bill knows people. He trained them as master gardeners, and then they left. Would they go to North Carolina, something like that? But they lived in a mobile home community, and it was very shady. And so his entire yard, he didn't even try to have turf. The base of his yard was oak leaves. And I mean, they were like 8 inches of oak leaves, and they looked like they were shellacked there. No leaf dared move out of place for him. And lots of plants and stuff. It was Florida friendly. But so part of that process is you have to get a soil test. So I'm expecting, in this very oak, community with a lot of oak trees, and he has 8 inches of oak leaves on his yard. I'm expecting a low pH, 6.5, just like, anybody else's probably would be. So that just kind of tells you, you're not going to change the soil pH probably for 1,000 years or something. So,
well, and that really kind of brings up my question is, what is your goal with attempting to use the sawdust to change the pH? Because, it is difficult to do any kind of long-term anything with the pH, as Lily was saying. But if there's certain plants you're trying to grow, veggie style or something like that, on a small scale in a raised bed or in, small areas, you can potentially do some moderating it. But otherwise, you may want to look at what your plant palette is and what you're attempting to grow and adapt the plant palette rather than adapt the soil. That's kind of one of those fundamental parts of right plant, right place that we talk about in FFL is, it's much easier to work with the conditions you have and adapt what you're trying to grow than the other way around.
Or else go container, like you said. That basically, when you see the blueberries growing, they look like they're in the ground, but they are they're sitting in pine bark to have the low pH that they need. So.
And Frank, look, somebody from Wes is from Pasco County, so.
Hey.
I live very close to the same area, so the County Line Road is maybe a mile or two away from here. So we have a lot of overlap.
Absolutely. Well, we enjoyed having you here today, and by all means, reach out with any questions you have. We're always available. If you're not following us on Facebook, you can find Lily and the Pasco FFL programs both with Facebook pages, and we are Pasco EXT, and Lily is the Hernando FFL Lily Browning, right?
Mm-hmm. FFL program, yes.
Yeah.
And I like watching Frank's stuff, and I share his stuff, and I learn from him, and we all bounce off of each other. So.
Indeed.
And for anybody who's interested in any of our virtual online upcoming classes, if you look at the bottom of your screen, if you just go to Hernando Extension, all one word.com, you're going to see a whole listing of all the different classes that I teach, Lily teaches, everybody else at our office teaches, and all the details that you're going to need, whether it be on Facebook Live, on Zoom, whether we're recording it or not, whatever it might be, everything you need to know is right there. And if you need more information, here's our office phone number, 352-754-4433. And if you call, you will get a hold of Teresa. And Teresa, like I tell all the brand new master gardeners, Teresa knows everything. So whatever you want to know, call Teresa and ask. She'll tell you.
And Bill and I, next Wednesday, we have a class on, you can find the event on my Facebook page. You can find the Zoom link. It's Dangers in the Garden, 10 o'clock.
That sounds scary.
No, I'm sorry, 12 o'clock. I keep forgetting that. It's a lunch and learn. 12 o'clock next Wednesday. Dangers in the Garden. I asked him to talk about murder hornets, so I don't know.
That sounds scary. I'll make sure that I have lunch here, and I'll go ahead and talk and eat all at the same time. How's that?
Okay, if that's what you want to do. Right.
And there was my email and Lily's email. Were very easy to get a hold of if you guys have any additional questions. Otherwise, we will see you here again next week. Same time, I think next Thursday is just going to be myself and Teresa. Lily will not be with us next week.
No. Sorry.
But that's okay because Teresa knows everything and she will be with me. So we'll be able to answer any kind of question you might have. So, hey, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in and asking so many questions on so many different topics. It definitely keeps us on our toes. And like I said, we will see you again next week. So thank you very much. Until then, we'll see you.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye-bye,
happy
Frank.
gardening.